I think we want to be listened to only second from the need for oxygen. And that's because we have a deep need for connection. Even introverts. I think all human beings, a primary drive is a drive for connection. And I think that when we're talking over each other, interrupting and not listening, we're trying to get in connection. See me. So I'm speaking about me. Well, but what needs to be seen is that if I want you to see me, it starts by me listening to you. And if I'm a generous listener to you, you'll be that generous listener and kind. So how can I accept this moment right here, right now? And that makes us a good listener.
Welcome to Story Doc. I'm Adam Taub. In this episode, I spoke to Courtney Pullen, an individual and family coach and consultant with a background in psychotherapy. What are some of the challenges, blocks to, being a good listener?
I think the biggest challenge is self-absorption. And I call it the fast pass match. Fun to say. And the fast pass match is when, Adam, you're talking about something and I start thinking or daydreaming about my match to what you're saying. So you said you studied in the Dominican Republic. Then I interrupt you to talk about, my son lives in Guatemala, and I hijack the conversation and make it about me. I think that happens the majority of the time in communication. People make it about them rather than about us being in this co-creative process together. I think something that's related to it, Adam, is presence. Is that to be fully present in a conversation is to be fully present in your life. And I think that most of us we're thinking about the next thing, or we're thinking about what happened this morning. We're not here. We're not occupying this space. I remember going to a conference many years ago thinking about this. And this is people I see once a year. And, there's new people attending and old timers and everything. And what I had a tendency to do was to always want to be reconnected to my old friends. I always saw it as a social opportunity. And I thought, I'm going to be totally present for this conference. If I'm talking to you, I'm not going to be looking over your shoulder thinking, there's Fred. I haven't seen Fred for 2 years. I'm like here, right now. Because I think what's happening in our ego is that we're making this moment insufficient. This moment will be better if I could talk to Fred. I'm like, how crazy is that, right? So how can I accept this moment right here, right now? And that makes us a good listener. Yeah, I see listening as a vital component, I should say, of communication. Because it's not just passively listening. Martin Buber, who wrote the book I and Thou, he talked about a phrase he coined called essential reciprocity. He used an example. He says he was a professor, and he said, when a student asks me a question, something occurs in the space between us that we start co-creating a new reality. So it's not me just responding to the question. It's exploring the space in between. And that to me is the essence of communication, is that sense of essential reciprocity, which involves listening really keenly for what's really being said, what's underneath what's being said. Paying attention, I think we all need to be paying attention to body language, affect, what's going on behind the question or the concern or the issue. And I think that often people, using Buber's example, I think that often a question comes up and people don't really know the purpose of the question. It was just an emotional response to, wait a minute, what does this mean? But part of that exploration is, what's the purpose that's looking to be communicated? And how do we listen for purpose? Listen for that person's why.
Are there other things that sort of help with this, whether it's curiosity? Are there other attributes that help a person listen better?
One of my favorite Einstein quotes is, this is funny coming from Einstein, right? I have no particular talents. I'm just passionately curious. So you said the word, it is a key word, is to be curious, to be passionately curious. Because I think that's a key focus of our listening is, am I learning something, particularly from people I know so well? You know, like my wife and I, we're together all the damn time. And I say I'm listening to her, but there's a part of me that's not listening because I've heard it all before, right? It's like, no, how can I keep that fresh? That listening, particularly for the people that we're the closest to. Now, do I continue doing that throughout my life? Oh God, no. You would think with that lesson I would have held on to it forever, but I do in all my social interactions. It comes up for me as a thought, as an intention. I want to be present for these conversations. And I probably fail 70-80% of the time. I've had different twists and turns in my career, and what my commitment has been, that the most significant thread that I've been following is working with what's called enterprise families. So these are families that may have an operating business, but they've grown beyond that to it's multi-generational family sharing wealth and estates and trust and all that stuff. They tend to fail around 80% of the time towards the end of the third generation. And which is an alarming statistic. And when I say fail, I mean fail. They blow up. They don't just lose all their money, they blow up their relationships. The primary cause for that is a breakdown in trust and communication. The second reason is a lack of emotional and technical preparation for the errors, and the third is a lack of family governance. But number one is communication. So that's a big deal, right? So when you're looking at a family system, so all my work starts with establishing how are we doing in our communication? Are you listening to each other? How do you deal with the conversations that are challenging? And this political environment of ours, man, families are getting torn apart. They're much more divisive now than they were just 10 years ago. So they need a lot of help, a lot of support, a lot of skill building for communication and listening. Particularly when I'm mediating something like this in a family or in a business system, I start with what is it that we can't agree on? Can we agree that it's, today's date and that we're hanging out in Wheat Ridge, Colorado? Okay. Can we agree that we both care about each other in the relationship? Okay. So if we start with our fundamental commonality as human beings, then it calms the amygdala down, that reptilian brain. So I'm not like scanning the environment looking for threat. I'm like, okay, no. We started by saying we care about each other in the relationship. From that foundation, can we now explore our differences while keeping this in mind over here? So that's a lot easier access point to the conversation. I'm looking for, and I have this belief that there's always an intersection to be found. So you have a different political view than I do. I bet I can find a connection point, a common ground, if you will. A common breakdown with these affluent families is they're sharing like a second home or a property or land, a ranch or whatever it is. And it's really emotionally charged. So what I'll say in the mediation is, when I do the interviews, my process is always, let's say there are 8 people, I interview all 8 people to understand them and their point of view. And I'll ask them a question about what's your purpose for this real estate. And then what I find is with the 8 people, they're closer than you would think. So then when I get them in a room, I say, can we start with what's the purpose of this real estate? Because when I interviewed the 8 of you, it sounded like you're kind of close. Oh, okay. Really? And they're surprised as I am. So then we get into a shared purpose conversation. Okay, so now we've agreed on this is our purpose. Now, let's have the conversations for how to get there. What we have a tendency to do is we start at method. What are we going to do about the real estate? And then we argue about the how. If we start with why, what's the purpose? Then the conversations about how to get there go a whole lot better. Invest in what they care more about, i.e. purpose, than indulging my need to be right, my need to be heard, my need for whatever. Because that, particularly in a family system, it's all those childhood needs get all wrapped up. I don't want to give you what you want for the real estate because you got taken to baseball practice and mom always missed my swim meets. Okay. Now that was their context, but can we be talking about the purpose here? And it shifts. The reptilian brain calms down and the prefrontal cortex engages. So now we can be in a productive conversation about how to fulfill this and not be in spin cycle back here about swim practice. All families and the family systems that I work with are no exception. They carry old stories about each other. Oh, Adam, remember, he was the one that skipped school that time or was daydreaming and, was whatever. And then people are still carrying that story about you 30 years later. We need to keep our listening fresh. We need to let people live into a new reality of who they are. We are always evolving and changing. We need to let go of those old files that we have about each other about, remember Courtney, he was this irresponsible kid, always in trouble. Well, yeah, Dad, that was 50 years ago, So listen for the new reality that's constantly emerging for all of us. So if the family can kind of level out the playing field and we're all learning together from each other, I've had a lot of families respond well to that one. They're like, oh. So I'll ask the mom and dad, what have you learned from your kids in the last year? And they get excited. They're like, man, son Bob is doing stuff I've never even heard of. There have always been challenges to listening and communication. Always have been, always will be. I don't see that changing. And I like to start with that as a foundational principle. I think there's some nuances about millennials like to be listened to differently than the next Zs and so forth and so on. I think like the silent generation, we're tough to communicate with. And in my work with multi-generational families, that still comes up. It's like, man, they spent their whole life, I don't communicate. I was in the war, no one knows what happened to this day, whatever, stuff like that. And technology, oh my God, makes it so much worse. I mean, if I can facilitate a family meeting and someone not pull out a phone for a few hours, it's a victory. So anyway, every generation has its challenges, maybe the simplest way of saying that. There is an assessment, ironically, out of Boulder, Colorado, called ECHO. And it quantifies our listening habits. For instance, it'll say you're an analytical listener. So you're listening for facts and data and information in that very strict kind of analytical way. Or that you're a relational listener. And every style has its shadow side and its strength. So like I'm a relational listener, but it can get me into trouble. Because as I shared as you're setting up your camera, is that sometimes I can listen too much and not speak. Or I'll make a decision emotionally. So I'll be at a conference and I love this speaker. I love everything he's saying. I get on my phone and I order his newest book. And I get back to my office a week later and I've got all these books from Amazon. I'm like, I've done it again. So that's the shadow side. So that the echo assessment, I think, is the only tool I'm aware of that quantifies our listening habit, they call it. We just need to practice. Yeah. Don't make it complicated. Keep it simple. Be present and listen.